Hey, what's up, Plus Ultra fam? It's me, Plus Ultraman, and today we can finally revisit one of your favorite timelines on the channel. And again, I am very sorry for how long the wait on this has been. All I can say is writer's block isn't fun. Now, for our quick recap. When we last left off, the student internships took place, with some variations for a few characters, but for a lot of them, the story hasn't diverged too much. Afterwards, the practical exams took place, with the biggest change being a loss by Bakugo and Midoriya to All Might. We'll be returning to this story now. Oh, and I do know the events of two heroes take place somewhere between the end of the sports festival and the fight with Stain, but we'll be shifting that to happen a tiny bit later in the timeline. Okay, this time we're really getting back to the story. Stain stared into the masked face of the man in the mirror, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. It made no sense, but when he voiced this, he swore he could hear another voice, eerily similar to his own, but his mouth wasn't the one moving. The villain in the mirror grew annoyed at Stain's lack of understanding of the situation, while Stain grew increasingly more disturbed by all this info the other person had on him. He was convinced it was some villain with a quirk that allowed him to inhabit mirrors, but his assumption was quickly proven wrong. His name was Stendhal, and he was the real Chizome Akaguro. Being forced to explain further, the Mirror Man elaborated that a while ago, he fought against a strong, quirkless man in an alleyway. At some point, he attempted to use the binding technique he created, but it was bounced back at him. That quirkless man had more willpower than most people he'd ever meet. Because of this, it seemed like his psyche was split, ending up with the weaker personality known as Stain taking control, a sort of ego versus superego situation, if you will. Remember in part 4 of this series, I went into further detail about bloodlust binding and how it works. I also mentioned a little tidbit about damaging one's own psyche if they were to use the technique on someone with extremely strong willpower and character. In this non-canon timeline, I propose that Stendhal's use of this non-canon technique against Knuckle Duster, a man with extremely strong willpower, caused irreparable damage to his own mind, causing it to fracture and allow his subconscious and conscious minds to switch places. This is also the reason the Stain of this timeline was so easily influenced by Izuku Midoriya. His ideals were not truly his own. Stain had trouble wrapping his head around all this. He was a combat genius, he didn't know anything about all this psychology. But, from what he could gather, this was a villain, or at least he was a villain in the past, that had fought against some vigilante hero, and lost. What would All Might do? He then got an idea. He put his hands on his hips, and did his best All Might impression, smiling and laughing. From what he understood, this villain had already been defeated, and justice had been served. He was served and got his sentence in his own mind. He left the bathroom, nervously, but his smile later faltered. A few days later, Stain actually approaches Midoriya and apologized for how he's been acting. He explains that he had been on the edge and very stressed lately, and Izuku actually accepts his apology way easier than Stain thought he would. But Deku knew Stain. He knew he didn't handle pressure extremely well, and he mentioned that if he ever needed to talk again about something like this, he was always there to help. Stain was really relieved that his protege and friend held no grudge against him. But then a thought came to him, and he mentioned to Deku that he should only use bloodlust binding in emergency situations from now on. This confused Deku, but he does agree. Later, after a special class, All Might approaches Deku and invites him to attend an event on Island with him. Deku is all too apt to accept, but he asks if Stain will be coming along with them. All Might tells him that he hadn't really thought about asking him, since things had been so tense lately. He'd rather avoid the drama and just have a very nice relaxing trip. Luckily for Stain, the Deku of this timeline is a bit more forceful, and he insists that Stain come with them. He had already apologized to the both of them, so there is no real need to hold a grudge. All Might can't help but smile, and I think he could pull some strings to get Stain admitted to Eye Island as well. Now, the plane ride to Eye Island is actually pretty nice. Deku and Stain have some conversations about All Might's glory days, while he naps, and they even talk about getting Deku a cape like one of All Might's older costumes. But Deku mentions that he's a big fan of the scarf he has now, as it makes him look kinda like Stain, which gives his former master a big smile of pride. The two seem to be closer than ever, and that made everyone happy. The arrival to Eye Island also goes pretty similar to canon. The trio meets Melissa and then David Shield, and I think Stain and Deku both fan out over meeting David. So the two of them can be alone for a while. David sends Melissa to show Deku around the island, and All Might sends Stain to keep an eye on the both of them, meaning they'll be exploring Eye Island as a trio. And we still get the inconspicuous introductions of Deku's classmates, but Stain is there. Also note, Stain wouldn't be allowed to have any of his weapons on the island, so I imagine they'd be kept at a customs area somewhere where people arrive into the island. Now, onto the bit with the villain course. It goes pretty similar to canon as well. For one thing, Bakugo might have completed it in 14 seconds instead of 15 seconds, as he is a stronger version of himself here than he is in canon. He still yells at Deku, but he isn't anywhere near as scared of him as he is in canon. Not to mention, Stain also encourages Deku to try it out. And remember, this Deku is much stronger and leaks faster than his canon counterpart, even without using One for All. So let's say that he hits about 14 seconds as well, due to his speed alone. And because of how Todoroki's powers work, and the fact that he'd want to beat his rivals, he'd score an insane 12 seconds. After the villain chorus, Bakugo demands that Deku speak to him privately later on, and Deku reluctantly agrees. Later, when they are finally able to get somewhere private, namely Bakugo's room, the blonde quickly cuts off any questions Deku had. He knew that Deku was All Might's successor and had somehow received his power. It explained why their quirks were so similar. He was also guessing that the new sidekick Stain had some kind of relationship to Deku, since their costumes almost matched. This leads Deku to clam up, as Bakugo's sleuthing had been almost spot on. He also didn't know that Bakugo had heard their conversations in the infirmary after the exams. Bakugo then elaborates that he wanted the full story, and though this Deku has usually been more aggressive in this timeline, he can't worm his way out of this one. Bakugo had deduced almost everything correctly, and it was useless to lie. So he tells Bakugo what exactly was going on, leaving out what details he could, but still giving his former bully a lot of insight in his life. The conversation ends with Katsuki now knowing about All Might's quirk being something that one could inherit, and that Deku had only received it after having trained under Stain. He isn't sure how to react, but he decides to go off and think about this. While Deku is just as confused as he is, he expected a more violent reaction. But he takes what he can get and goes off as well to get ready for the party. Later that night, we'd also get to see Stain in a suit, which would be pretty interesting. Later at the party, Stain is with All Might when Wolfram... By the way, who all knew this guy's name was Wolfram? Because I don't remember them ever saying that in the film. But nevertheless, Anime Magneto takes everyone hostage. Shockingly, instead of also being trapped, All Might, using all the speed he could, is able to throw Stain out of the way just in time, keeping him from also being captured himself. The former anti-hero's first instinct was to fight, but All Might orders him to find and protect the students. Stain grimaces at this, but knows this would be the best option, as he currently had no weapons on him. He activates Bloodlust Bindings to stun Wolfram's thugs, and escapes. He first goes and finds Izuku and the other students, and the debate on whether or not to stay and free the heroes begins. Now, here do we see a bit of development for Stain. He's actually faced with a major ethical question right now. Do as All Might said and protect the students, or fight to free the heroes? A while ago, he would have cursed those who thought of running as cowards and fakes, but he was a teacher now, and his students' safety was his top priority. That said, as a teacher, what kind of example would he be setting if he didn't teach his students to push beyond the fear and greed that drives fake heroes? So again, he asks himself, what would All Might do if faced with this dilemma? And the answer ends up being, do both. With that, the group set out to free the heroes and save the day. After they communicate their plan to All Might, Stain asks Yaoyorozu to make him some new weapons, and the group set out with the same plan as in the original film. Everything goes about the exact same from here, though when Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima take on Daigo and Nobu, the villains they fought in the movie, Stain nudges Deku and the two nod. They rush out and use a double Bloodlust Binding that is potent enough to render the two villains unconscious, instead of just stunning them. With that done, the group is able to move along with two of the class's most powerful fighters in tow. When faced with the patrol robots, I don't see Bakugo listening to Melissa about not destroying them, and so after he destroys a massive load of them in an explosion, the group begrudgingly destroyed them as well. Afterwards, Yaoyorozu and a lot of others with similar stamina issues would probably be a bit tired and would need to rest. They would rejoin them later on. This means that the group that moves forward consists of Deku, Stain, Melissa, Ochako, Bakugo, and Todoroki. Moving on to the part where the group breaks into the tower, I think Ochako could float everyone up there, including herself, while Bakugo uses explosions to steer them in midair. Finally, they'd burst into the tower and be confronted by Swordkill, the sword-quirked villain. Because the group is so large, Stain decides he'd be the one to take him on, so the group could keep pushing forward. They keep moving on, and we still get the revelation of David Shield's true ambitions, as well as Wolfram's true plan. Here in this timeline, Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki team up to take on the Magnet villain, while Melissa and Ochako go to free the heroes. Because Wolfram's long-range attacks are being blocked by Todoroki's ice, and he's having to deal with Bakugo and Deku's close-range attacks, the group is doing a lot better in this first round than Deku did in the original story. But remember, Wolfram has a gun. One time, when Bakugo and Deku get way too close, the villain shows no mercy and fires at the nearest one of them, Deku. Bakugo sees this and fires out an explosion, that pushes him in front of the bullet, where he is thankfully only winged in the shoulder. He passes out due to shock and blood loss, and Deku and Todoroki go into a total rage and begin fighting much harder than they did before. But again, the gun is a big problem. They end up hiding behind a block of ice while holding Bakugo, but soon Swordkill and Stain burst onto the scene, with Swordkill sporting a large assortment of bruises and cuts. Apparently, he was Type O. It turns out the Yaoyorozu hadn't made Stain's replacement sword sharp enough. This, along with holding back to not kill Swordkill, allows the villain to stay in the fight, but just barely, even when having his blood licked. Their fight is stopped as their appearance shocks everyone, and Stain, seeing Bakugo hurt, rushes over to try and provide some better medical attention than what Deku and Todoroki could give. He knows a lot about wounds and blood loss after all. With time to regroup, Swordkill rushes over to Wolfram and steals the quirk amplifier. In this timeline, I'm going to say that Swordkill was also given a second quirk by All for One. In the movie, I got the feeling that Swordkill was maybe second or third in command, so it's kind of strange that Deku took him out so easily, so it makes a bit of sense to power him up some. I'm giving him a custom quirk I'll be labeling it as Split. The user is able to separate their consciousness and subconsciousness into two bodies. With this ability activated and his swords turned to longer and sharper blades due to the quirk amplifier, he is able to re-engage Stain, but finally, All Might appears. Wolfram gets anxious seeing the #1 hero appear and steals the amplifier back from Swordkill, putting it on himself. From here, the story is going to become very similar to canon, with Deku and All Might teaming up to fight Wolfram, but we will not be focusing on that. Stain still has a villain to beat. Swordkill and his clone are still aggressive and show slight signs of amplifications to be still there. It was possible he was also taking quirk amplification drugs. He still has Bakugo unconscious with him, as well as the other students, and Melissa. This means that he's going to take them on alone, as Ida and the other students are arrested, but Stain orders for them to stay back. This guy's quirk and mental state made him super dangerous. The three swordsmen clash for a few seconds, and Stain actually shows he has a lot of skill in this regard, and more importantly, he finally feels like he can fire off another bloodless binding. He's able to do so and freezes the Swordkill twins. At the same time, Deku and All Might move in to finish off Wolfram with a double Detroit smash, but something doesn't feel right. As the island is covered in light and noise, the twins fuse back into one being, and Swordkill drops to his knees, holding his head in pain and yelling. But the voice morphs into one that sounds like Stain's. The sword villain looks up and gives Stain a grin that reminds him too much of his own, before speaking the name Chizome Akeguro. Stain's blood runs cold as he realizes who was speaking. Before he could even say the name Stendhal, the villain used the version of the bloodless binding technique so powerful it is able to render Stain and all the students completely unconscious. The seemingly possessed Swordkill flees the island while he can. Later on, the authorities and other heroes arrive to haul away the villains and help with cleanup. At an ambulance, Stain tells All Might and Deku of what happened during his fight, as well as giving a hypothesis of the outcome of it. To him, it was like his alter ego had infested his mind in a way, and possibly been projected at Swordkill through the bloodless binding, since it uses negative emotions. He'd been worrying about Stendhal ever since he learned of him, so it was possible that a mixture of the quirk amplification device as well as drugs, All for One's quirk and bloodless binding, had affected each other in a toxic way that ended up blanking Swordkill's mind and allowing the consciousness of Stendhal to stick to him. They couldn't be sure, but this made sense. Bottom line, there was a new villain out in the world now, more dangerous than Stan had ever been, and he was going to stop him. But that plus Ultra fans will be leaving the story off for right now. I hope you all enjoyed the 5th part, even though it got a bit fanfiction-y at the end there, and I promise part 6 won't have anywhere near the same amount of wait time. Other than that, if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider supporting Plus Ultraman on Patreon. It's an awesome tool for rewarding you guys, and it's a great way to help out the channel. If you can't, liking the videos, sharing them, and subscribing is also great support, and hitting the notification bell would also be great. But as always, go beyond Plus Ultra, and see you guys